Hey everyone, Tim here. I hope you're doing well. And as I introduced last week, over these next 4 weeks, during these update videos, I'm going to be reading through a classic work from the early church father Athanasius called On the Incarnation, and just sharing some highlights through these readings during this Advent season each week. And as I said last week, there are nativity stories of the birth of Jesus in Matthew's and Luke's gospel accounts. John gives us more of kind of the view from heaven, the view from eternity, and the key verse there is John 1:14, that the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, and we have seen his glory as of the only Son from the Father, full of grace and truth. And this is really the vantage point that Athanasius is working with. The Word become flesh, that eternal Son who is called the Word, who is with God in eternity and is God. He's the one who becomes a man for our salvation. And really, as I said last week, the book is really an exploration of how fitting it was that the Word would become flesh for our salvation, that the nature of salvation that the whole Bible is talking about, that this would be the perfect plan, this would be the perfect way to do it. And he says near the very beginning of the book, he expresses this, quote, "The renewal of creation has been wrought by the self-same Word who made it in the beginning," end quote. So he's drawing from this very biblical parallel between the original creation and salvation as a kind of new creation, and saying that the Word, as we meet him very early on in John 1, that all things were made through him, and without him was not anything made that was made. This Word, it's very fitting that he would be the one by whom God would bring about the recreating work of salvation. Now, one thing that's interesting as you move into this book is that he describes the sin problem in a way that might be a little bit unusual to us. We tend to talk about sin in legal categories, or we might say forensic categories that belong in the realm of the courtroom. We talk about guilt, we talk about punishment, and these are very appropriate and very biblical categories. But there are a lot of other terms and conceptual categories that the Bible uses to talk about sin and its problems. And Athanasius narrows in on this talk about what we might summarize as corruption. Now, the translation I'm using, he uses that word corruption. By the way, I read through Article 10. There's all these different ways it's been broken down, but I think they all use these sort of article numbers, and I read through Article 10. Next week, I'm going to plan to read through Article 25, just so you know if anyone's reading along. But he talks about the corruption of our nature. We were made by the Word in God's image, and we're made to represent God. We're made with an image that has a certain dignity. And in sin, we have corrupted that nature. And it's almost as though he even speaks, and it's a challenging way of thinking, that he even speaks as though it's a kind of slide away from existence into a kind of non-existence. Now, he's not saying fully and literally we don't exist anymore as sinners. But if you think about existence as kind of nearness to God, the one in whose image we were made, the one we were made to commune with, that we have turned away from him, it's almost as though we've slid away from God and from goodness and from reality in a way. And so he says the presence and love of the Word had called them, that's man, that's us, into being. Inevitably, therefore, when they lost the knowledge of God, they lost existence with it. For it is God alone who exists. Evil is non-being, the negation and antithesis of good, end quote. And again, I don't think he's saying that sinners don't exist anymore, but he's saying that in our distance from God, we're moving away from kind of the center of existence and being, and we're almost unmaking ourselves with sin. That's the problem of corruption. And you even see death as that. Death is this kind of cessation of existence, that we're kind of disintegrating because of sin. And so this is the problem. And Athanasius wouldn't deny the legal categories that the Bible uses and wouldn't deny guilt. But when he's talking about what does it mean that the Word took on human nature, he really wants to zero in on the problem that sin brought about with our nature. That is, our nature was corrupted. We were brought under the dominion of death, and again, moving into this sort of a negation of our existence. And so from that standpoint, he starts talking about why the incarnation was necessary for salvation. And so I'll read another quote. He says, "He assumed a body capable of death in order that it," that is, the body he assumed, "in order that it, through belonging to the Word, who is above all, and itself remaining incorruptible through his indwelling, might therefore put an end to corruption for all others as well, by the grace of the resurrection." end quote. So there's this picture of human nature that has been brought under the dominion of death, that we have been brought under this state of corruption. And sort of from the divine vantage point, it's like, how do you redeem this nature? Well, you take this Word who is above all and incorruptible, you unite him to this human nature so that he can lift up this human nature back up to where it belongs. And that's why the incarnation is so important, that very God, true God, becomes true man so that he can take everything that he was united to and redeem it back and raise it back up from that corrupted state. And that's really how Athanasius is going to talk about the incarnation, especially as it connects to salvation throughout this book. So I'm going to keep going in future weeks, moving deeper into the book. He's going to get into more issues there. Again, next week I'll be looking at articles 11 through 25, Lord willing. But in my reading of this, I found it very encouraging and stimulating to just think through, again, the import and the depth of what it means that Christ became one of us. And I think in reading this portion in particular, I was really struck by the sense of what a sorry state sin puts us in. Again, not just guilt, but this sense of we are sort of disintegrating as people under the dominion of sin. And Christ came to bring us back and to pull us back out of that morass of sin. And so what a gift the incarnation is. Now, moving on to what's going on with us as a church. This Saturday evening, we have our potluck. So that's going to be at 5 p.m. It's our annual tradition. We've done it for a few years now. And so make sure to sign up if you haven't done so. There's an online form that Jeff Presnell sent out yesterday. And also bring friends and family. This would be a great time to bring non-believers who may have kind of a proclivity to come to a Christmas event at a church, even if no other time of the year. There will be some singing. There will be a devotional related to Christmas and what it means from God's Word. So it'd be a great opportunity to expose people to the gospel in relation to Christmas, as well as just some fellowship with believers. Also on Sunday, we have at 9 p.m., we're beginning a new Equipping Hour series, a New Testament survey. Then at 10:30, we have corporate worship. And at 5 p.m., because it's the second Sunday of the month, we're doing our community groups. You can find out more about the community groups and where they meet in the newsletter. All right, so I hope to see you Sunday, and I hope you're doing well in the grace of God until then. All right, bye-bye.